Roughly 2 years ago, I made a video about Sonic Frontiers upon its release. For the first time, I felt truly excited, intrigued, and entirely satisfied start to finish with a new Sonic game in over a decade. If you're new to my channel or just didn't watch that one, then maybe you should go back there first. I'm not sure if I'd consider that video a proper review of the game as a store shelf money transaction product, but as a vehicle to share my love of the series and my rediscovered hope for the future of it in general, I think I did a good job. It's part of why I never made a follow-up video about the Final Horizons DLC. I loved it and feel the game improves with it, besides these parts. But a Nova Zone video about Final Horizons would have just resulted in another Sonic Dude Bro running down the DLC's content without any change to my overall new excitement for the future of the series. So that brings up 2 extra questions before we move on to the main part of this video. What did Sonic do in the following 2 years? And when was the last time I was excited for Sonic? Well, for my quick rundown of Sonic in the past 2 years, Sega put out quite a few pieces of Sonic media that I've still mostly loved, just didn't quite have a good reason to make videos on them. I had tons of fun revisiting another classic Sonic game in Sonic Superstars, besides these parts. But I really don't think I can talk about it when I've never made videos on any of the classic Sonics before. I'd end up spending 90% of that video contextualizing my classic Sonic opinions, and probably part of Advance too, since it's a little relevant. We also saw Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, which reintroduced characters that have gone underutilized in the video games for years, like the Chaotix, Blaze, and Rouge, while giving out some fun jokes at a time where the games are getting serious again, which we'll see a lot of later. The only reason I didn't talk about that one is because it's a free 2 to 3 hour comedy game. Making even a 15-minute video about it would take more time than literally anyone's playthrough, and result in giving away the jokes or Blaze and Rouge secret backroom scene that surpasses anything Secret Rings gave us. I've also consistently read the IDW comics because I'm deeply engaged with the story, and love seeing all my favorite underutilized characters in stories that are canon to the main universe. An opinion that's apparently controversial to say with some Sonic fans. Which, not to be a total dick since I genuinely want to save this for another day, I feel like half of you guys that complain about them don't actually read comics and fail to understand the medium very well, resulting in pretty bad fucking faith takes. Some of these complaints seem to miss that this is not a video game. There's decades of tropes and storytelling conventions y'all don't want to respect because too many words hurt your brain. The Archie fans that hate on IDW, you guys are valid, I guess. I respectfully disagree with your opinions, but speak your piece. Anyway, skipping the stuff meant for the target demographic I failed to land in because I found it harmless and you're, quite frankly, a loser if this pisses you off. Then begrudgingly ignoring Dream Team because the only recent Sonic anything I haven't vibed with 100% is Sonic Prime. While I lost my interest in a lot of it, I got super invested whenever Sonic and Shadow interacted. Those parts were peak Hedgehog to me. I have fucking missed Sega writing Shadow prominent roles in the series. He had a boss in Generations, funny bits in 2 episodes of Boom, and then the best part of Forces, but Sega's hardlined him hardcore after the Adventure era. Even IDW, as much as I enjoy it, has shafted the Ultimate Life Form until a few recent issues. Sega has placed strict mandates on the boy, and honestly, I kinda get why. Look, Shadow is a complicated character to get right, but simultaneously, from a creativity standpoint, he's a gold mine. Without question, indisputably, beyond a reasonable doubt, kill yourself in the Sonic Superstars final boss. If you disagree, Shadow the Hedgehog is fucking cool. Does he appear in games I don't like? Yeah, I can't stand most of these too, but you know what Shadow still is in those? Cool as ice. Does it come off as a little silly when Shadow says taking the emerald is like taking candy from a baby?
Which is fine by me.
I don't think I need to answer that. But was he cool while saying it? Fuck yeah, he was. Everyone wants this guy. Anytime that Sega lifts those restrictions, the writers go balls to the wall. Toyota's Sonic Channel Stories, translations by the Gaylord linked below, Evan Stanley's Eggperial City arc, Sonic Prime, and even his funny little appearance in Death of Sonic the Hedgehog showed a ton of love for the character that the primary games haven't shown for years. Which, to be fair, no one got anything during the solo era besides Sonic and debatably Tails, but at least all the other most important characters got to shine in Frontiers. Despite his long absence, Shadow's maintained that spot as the
second most popular character in the whole canon!
And he's been in 4 of the 6 mainline games after Sonic 06, which canonically take place after Shadow's introduction. It's a huge shame. Children, yearn for Shadow the Hedgehog. Okay, I yearn for Shadow the Hedgehog. I think given the timing, today I'm finally ready to admit this in a video, Shadow is, by a long shot, my favorite Sonic character. Like, I'm not much of a game or anime merch kind of guy. I'd rather spend my money on more games and more anime subscriptions in the hopes of the Western market not suffering a monopoly, but here and there I do indulge or receive a gift I love, including this Shadow the Hedgehog blanket from my then girlfriend. Additionally, if y'all have looked close enough, there may have been a time in the past when one of my videos revealed this. My longest held profile picture, the one that's consistently stayed on my oldest still active email account. The profile picture from the long lost Let's Play era I've completely wiped from existence is this. Angry Archie Shadow the Hedgehog with Kamina's glasses on. This character really fucking is all that. And for one simple reason, Sega has decided to capitalize on their inaction.
Do I look like I need your power?
The Sonic the Hedgehog movies. I've really enjoyed these so far. Is it the exact one-to-one desire I've had for a Sonic movie? No. But I already have that. Seeing both movies in theaters really were like events to me though. I remember going to see the first one by myself at one of those theaters that serve drinks too, as the only person over 20 without a child, and had a smile on my face for the whole movie. My only wish was that it had more than just Sonic and Eggman. But then, during the post-credits scene, I went crazy for the Tails reveal. It intrigued me so much, I spent like an hour theorizing about the next movie, partially because I had to sit at a cafe sobering up before I could drive home. When Sonic 2 went to theaters, I made my brother go with me, and he wasn't really happy with how crazy I went over this scene.
Project Shadow.
That was an event, and the trailers of movie 3 are looking cool. In fact, that event was so cool, Sega has initiated what they're calling the Year of Shadow. A year all about him with Sonic Movie 3 and the new-ish video game Sonic Shadow Generations at the forefront. A remaster of Sonic Generations, the last Sonic game I had hyped for, packaged together with a brand new campaign just as long as the original Generations, starring my favorite character. A campaign they promised to feature a deeper story, new levels, and a scaled down open zone format we'd seen in Sonic Frontiers. Honestly, if we look back a little bit, it almost feels like they built up to a non-Sonic character celebration of this scale for a while as well. Tails appeared in movie 2 and had a special IDW comic 2 years ago for his 30th anniversary, while Amy got extra focus in Death of Sonic the Hedgehog with her birthday kicking off the premise. They made her playable in Origins, Superstars, and Frontiers when conventional wisdom normally suggests fans to only expect Tails and Knuckles, plus her comic last year, so Shadow getting all of this feels like a natural evolution of the celebration. Sorry, Knux. At least he's getting his 30 Sun Rotations comic. To me, this was absolutely insane. I talked about how excited I was for Frontiers in that video, so of course with Shadow's whole year, I didn't actually have time for hype. Look, if y'all finished my Blaster Master Zero retrospective, y'all know I've had a lot IRL going on lately. So yeah, as inhumanly obsessed with the game and surrounding material as I am right now, I didn't have time to think about it for most of the year. Which may explain why I'm hyper-fixating hard enough to table 2 midway into production videos to make this one instead. So anyway, we have a lot to get into here, going beyond just the game itself and the surrounding media, so I think I'm gonna give us an easier intro first. Since I've never made a video about the Boost games besides a 9-minute short thoughts video on colors, I had to think a while on how I wanted to talk about Generations. I truly don't want to take away from the focus on Shadow or from an eventual deep dive into the Sonic Boost games, though whether I make that in 1 year or 4 is yet to be seen. Because of that, I'm going to do something Nova Zone fans aren't used to. I'm going to condense my thoughts on Generations and then talk about the changes in this remaster because of the controversy surrounding it. So quite frankly, Sonic Generations is the safest, problemless, highest fun percentage holding Sonic game in the entire series. It came out a few months after I turned 13, so even though we still indisputably classify that as childhood years, I got hyped up with every single nostalgia key they jingled in my face. Oh, that's one of my favorite stages from littler childhood. Oh, I can play my favorite songs. Holy shit, classic Sonic. My parents let me curse, they were pretty cool. The last part was a big deal that I think people truly take for granted these days. Throughout almost the entire 2000s, 2D Sonic Sonic did not release on consoles. In line with most of the industry, 2D games came out on handhelds as budget titles for little babies, and 3D big kid games swagged it out on home consoles with a full price. Due to this, Sonic Unleashed's day stages drew tons of attention for finally mixing the 2D and 3D together in the Boost formula. And then afterwards, we had the promise of Sonic the Hedgehog 4, a full 2D Sonic game on home consoles. And wait, remember last year when Mega Man 9 came out? What if we didn't get that. I don't give a shit what brain-dead, historically ignorant take you say today. Everyone, and I mean everyone, wanted classic Sonic in 2010, or at least got excited to see him in Generations. Sonic's original audience reached peak disposable income around here, and the design they grew up with was nowhere. Not even the collections of old Sonic games had classic Sonic on them. He's on the cover of Sonic Genesis, and a few general Sega Genesis compilations, half of which just reuse pre-existing Greg Martin art. Between the newly returning 2D on consoles again, both in and outside of Sonic, and Sonic 4's missed opportunity to simulate retro Sonic graphics, classic Sonic kicking his way on screen couldn't have come at a better time. Did he have 1-to-1 physics with Genesis classic Sonic? Not close at all, really. But most people grew to love Generations classic Sonic for what it is, with the overpowered spin dash and absolutely insane levels. 3D HD recreations of fan-favorite stages that fans got to vote on, with both a boost-styled level modeled after the gameplay from Unleashed in Colors, plus a classic-styled level. In my opinion, the boost gameplay here is the peak of the formula, with perfected controls, a better camera than the prior two games, and a seemingly infinite amount of ways to play these stages, while the classic stages are my second favorite 2D gameplay style in any Sonic game. Every level in Generations feels like an event. We're back in the water at Chemical Plant, getting chased by the truck, dodging the flames of disaster! Generations gave us maybe the first Sonic perfection, a celebration of the entire series that treated even the commonly viewed as bad games with equal reverence to the popular ones. Unless said game didn't get enough votes for a level. Sorry, 3D blasters. Generations only had a few minor hiccups. First off, the game is pretty short. Honestly, I didn't mind this too much since I love replaying Sonic stages over and over, but many people wanted more. It's especially disappointing because Generations was the perfect game to give DLC. Throw in a different popular level like Casino Night Zone, Add a Bat, Metal Harper, lots they could have done, yet they didn't. Okay, they did actually add Casino Night as a fucking pinball table. In the context of Sonic in 2011, that's fine. I'd much rather have a short game that's top to bottom consistently fun than a long game that's only long because of some sort of extra padding that's antithetical to Sonic's fast-paced action platforming and occasional exploration. Additionally, both the story outline and script kinda sucked. It has a few alright jokes and extra references for longtime fans, but they truthfully didn't do much here. Sonic doesn't respond to his friends, they don't comment on any stage after the first two, they forgot to introduce classic Tails, he just shows up, and all around, outside of the fan service, which I must stress, it did really well. The story's kind of a nothing burger, and I'm an American who just moved to Vietnam. I've recently learned the pain of no burger. However, I don't think it truly mattered much for this game in particular. Unleashed in Colors started this trajectory, and so long as a later game picked up the slack, it's alright. But it took 11 years. I won't reiterate much on that. I talked about it with Frontiers in that Sonic Eras video I did. Oh, also the final boss of Generations sucked absolute ass. Fuck the time meter. Moving on, when it comes to the remaster, Sonic Generations, as a whole, is a nearly identical experience to the original release of Sonic Generations. If you disliked it then, if you liked it then, if you had a passing interest then, or if you had an aversion then, this release by itself does not do anything to change your opinion. To list them out, changes include native 60 FPS support, a drop dash for both modern and classic Sonic, 3 hidden chow you can find in each stage that hang around after you find them, an option to turn off lives, customizable controls including one that matches Sonic Frontiers, and most importantly, a partially rewritten script. Not a top-to-bottom redone story, just a change to the script. And to my count, 3 spots total where the animation is ever so slightly different. This is the most contentious change, despite Generations having like a 5-page script, So let me talk about the other things first. For the gameplay stuff, if you're against any of these existing, then honestly you're gonna need to give me a solid argument as to why. Findable chow, life removal, and custom controls are completely ignorable, unless you hate blank spots on a collection menu. So for those items, I think it's a complete win. No more lives, especially. Lives only matter in a Sonic game when you go start to finish for a first run on a new save file, so their inclusion in Generations always felt arbitrary to me. Generations is pretty lenient about not killing you when you fuck up, so when I'm replaying a stage for my own personal best times, I reset the moment I make any unintentional dick slam, meaning all lives did was send me back to the title screen every so often. Then at the time of writing, I haven't found all the chow yet, though given I'm just swapping between this and Kiwami 2 during my free time, I probably will by the time of editing. So right now my opinion is mainly that it gets me a little more bang for my buck. One of the tendencies Generations had with the red star rings was that you get most of them by taking the played good path rather than forcing you to explore the many paths in the game, which is reasonable. You walk a very tight rope in the boost games with that. They could have accidentally taken the unleashed approach and make finding collectibles completely fight against the boost gameplay. But with the chow, they're placed onto other paths you might ignore, or even slightly off to an area you didn't think to look, making me grow more familiar with the stages. Plus it's just nice fan service. Sega knows how much people miss the chow, and I think they're trying to remedy that through any means necessary, except an actual chow garden. Every chow you find comes directly out of the Sonic Adventure games, including the exclusive character chow. Well, for the drop dash, I want to make it clear I'm about to wing this little sentence. Originally I wrote in voice that I found no use for it. That's completely the opposite today. Yeah, when playing as modern Sonic, I'm not finding too many usage for it, really only if I'm out of boost meter, and if I'm out of boost meter as modern Sonic in Sonic Generations, then it's probably necessary I reset anyways. However, for classic Sonic, I don't think I can go back to this game without the drop dash. It's completely changed my way of playing. Similar to the classic games when they added it to Origins, I just spam it wherever I can. Yeah, it doesn't make you go as fast as the busted spin dash in Generations. However, the downside to that spin dash is that if you were on those really tight platforming parts like here in City Escape, it wasn't worthwhile to stop and get the spin dash going. Well now, with the drop dash for these tiny little moments, I can just drop dash, jump one or two more times, spin dash, and continue on my merry nice little flowy way. Truly, my only complaint with it is that for some fucking reason, the drop dash for classic Sonic is an equipable item, while for modern Sonic, it's just part of his moveset. That should have been reversed or consistent between both. Maybe it's to balance things because Sega looked at it as classic Sonic and knew it was better with him. Either way, it's a welcome addition and the main driving force for why I'll probably never play the base version of Generations again. With that out of the way, let's talk about script changes, and not that dumb Rouge censorship thing people bitch about. If you truly actually care, please find a scene in one of the games where you look at Rouge's back long enough for you to reach completion. Ian Flynn, the longtime comic writer who's now been working on some of the games, rewrote the dialogue of Generations. This got a lot of people up in arms because certain sections of the fanbase have an extremely huge hate boner for Ian Flynn. And I'm not gonna say you have to like his writing, at the very least don't attack him as a person, but some of y'all throw a really big fit anytime he's announced to even come close to touching a Sonic project. It's the same thing that happened to Pontac and Graf. Western fans can actually pronounce their name, so they get all the blame, even if the trends they wrote started elsewhere. One of the lazier complaints I see about Ian Flynn is that he relies on references a lot, which I think has its place here and there. In the first IDW arc when Metal Sonic quoted Crush 40 lyrics, that was pretty cheesy. But in Sonic Frontiers, which had the goal of reconnecting the audience with all things Sonic, I believe it served an important purpose. Then there's also a lot of people who get upset that many characters, especially Sonic, are out of character when Flynn writes him. But this is another one that's far more muddy under the surface. Lots of it comes from the way Sega Corporate chooses to write the characters, and another part comes from the circumstance of the story. People complain he's really wordy or talks about things he'd normally leave vague for the audience, but Ian's work mainly comes from American comics. A medium where show, not tell, is a much harder feat due to the static nature and slow once-a-month release schedule. Something I actually adore about the IDW Sonic comics is that there's more word bubbles than most of the shit DC and Marvel release per month now. I'll save my full thoughts for a more relevant time, but my main point is that I think many people state these complaints at a surface level without connecting it to the context, which links us back to the Generations rewrite. Overall, I think the rewrite makes the story of Generations like 5% better. So it improves, but very, and I do mean Very little actually changed. Like Ian Flynn said to expect nothing spectacular on his podcast, yet even then, I still came away shocked with how little changed. Absolutely, the strongest argument against this is why even bother? Or at the very least, why bother redoing all of it? Sega re-recorded every English line, whether it changed or not. So with characters like Vector, who did not change voices, only has 2 lines besides grunts, and one of them 100% unchanged from the original, they had to schedule with Keith Silverstein, write him a new paycheck, and he probably spent more time scheduling his time in the booth than actually being in there. Unless he has a home studio, then cross off that last item. Strange resource management aside, I do want to say why I think the rewrites work despite the lack of a reason to really do it. First of all, Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles got their idiocy toned down. Originally, all 3 of them were kinda on the dense side. Sonic and Tails had scenes immediately after Green Hill and Chemical Plant where they acted as if they only had a vague idea where these stages came from, including a line where Tails says he's never been to Green Hill. Even if we flatten our prerequisites to mean Tails going to a version of Green Hill on South Island in a 100% no question is canon game, we see Tails goes there at least twice. Sonic Chaos and Sonic Drift. But if we're not a pedantic asshole about this, it's like 8 or something, I don't know, you do it. I've never felt that this sat right with me. While Sonic's always on the move, he's still a smart guy. He remembers everyone he's saved, and likely most of where he adventured. Maybe he could have taken a minute to realize it, but I didn't really believe it with Tails. He's a canonical genius. I have a hard time believing he wouldn't recognize either of these 2 locations, especially Chemical Plant. He originally went there on his first real adventure with his big bro idol Sonic. No way could that not leave an impression on him. To remedy this, Tails and Sonic now recognize their location and use that to start unraveling the time meter mystery. I think it's a much more appropriate action for these characters to act out on screen. It just comes with one minor drawback: it loses some comedy. Look, I know the series is trying to be serious, but Sonic Generations is not. It's as cartoony kid stuff as possible. Because of that, it makes the identity of Generations' story, as absent of content as it was, a little muddied for the trade-off of characters more accurate to their adventure era and current portrayals. I think definitely Knuckles has it the weirdest. Sega wrestled with how to treat Knuckles' intelligence a lot after Sonic 3. Sonic Team designed him as a crafty, serious warrior innocent to the outside world and any social interactions, hence how Eggman tricked him in said story. Then Knuckles reached some sort of limbo where he maintained the serious attitude, but kept getting tricked by Eggman with less and less mention of the Master Emerald. It brought a whole new meaning to the old saying, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me again in Sonic Triple Trouble, Sonic Adventure, Sonic Advance 2, and 3 times in Sonic X, shame on the writers for damaging your reputation with the audience by relying on repeat scenarios." It led to the stories, starting maybe with Sonic X and then slipping into the games, portraying Knuckles as less and less competent, relegating him to a quick gag for his small roles per game. Discounting Boom because different universe, Generations and Lost World had him at his goofiest, despite his short appearance. In original Generations, he only had 2 scenes, one where Amy shoved him into a tree, and another where he said,
Hey, did you gain weight?
which I always got a little chuckle from, despite painting him as stupid. Sega removed both of these, likely to renew some integrity in him, but it has issues. For one, the animation looks like this.
Where is the rest of my island?
I ate just food.
So it's still a tad goofy. Then with the tree thing, this is where it gets controversial. Personally, I think it's an all-around better change. It originally added to the Knuckles as a punchline narrative, so the removal is better to me. But for the Amy side, that's the contentious part. A lot of Sonic fans have issues with the way Sega is treating Amy at the moment, a sentiment that I could not disagree more on. The biggest contention I see is that she's too calm and isn't upfront about her love for Sonic. Sega has a mandate against showing romance in Sonic games now, so for the foreseeable stories, you get undertones and nothing else. It's a mandate I'm not at all upset with, but it has resulted in a big restructure of Amy's persona. Mainly, they need to lean into her less dominant traits. It's why she gets tarot cards, more outfits, stepped up to a leadership role for a while, and is the first to reach out to other characters like Belle, Surge, Bark, Trip, and to a certain extent that one fucko from Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. It just comes at the cost of those other 2 traits, which I might be painting a target on my back, I'm kinda cool with after 30 years of stories. Amy, at introduction, was a Sonic fangirl that absolutely loved him, but now they've hung out frequently for years. It doesn't make sense for Sonic to want to hang out with Amy, but then turn around and run when she gets slightly excited. If anything, I think Sonic's character is improved by them downplaying Amy's fangirlishness. Anytime they show affection, which happens at least once every time they share an issue in IDW, it feels more mature to me. Amy isn't yelling about it, and Sonic doesn't try to fight against it. We already had those stories before, so why repeat them? With the new changes, Sonic can respond to her friendship and love without hostility like in the Adventure era where he ran off. Due to the nature of the Sonic the Hedgehog series, Amy can never have a full conclusion where she gets married to Sonic or something. That would end the series. So I think the low-key stuff is a good middle ground that allows for new stories while not erasing the past. Because as much as the reactionaries would have you think Sega is erasing her old actions to make the brand new interpretation the way she's always been, they're not. Sega sells Adventure 1, 2, Lost World, and Sonic CD with their personality from the originals unaltered, plus Sonic X is streamable in a shit ton of countries. Sega has not removed her character traits. They've just shuffled around the priority list of them based on if they're relevant to the story. Now, you can feel differently, I'm only stating my thoughts, but I feel like telling Sega to go back to Amy loudly professing her love all the time is like saying you want every Batman story to have him brood about his parents for a few minutes. Yes, this is a defining character trait, but that doesn't mean we need it every story. The audience already knows this. So yeah, that's my big take on Amy in the current era. I'm not a big enough fan of her to make a dedicated Amy video like I saw some people doing last year, but I just spent nearly 2 pages on this and everyone's talking about how much they altered her role in the remake of Generations, so it must be extremely substantial, right? Yeah, so they changed about 4 things. Just like the rest of the rewrite, nothing significant was changed. In this one cutscene shot, Sonic no longer shoves Amy, a change responding to many people saying that felt out of character since he normally runs from her advances. She no longer shoves Knuckles into a tree because Knuckles is strong enough to take one shove and Amy cares about her friends, makes sense, and her 2 rescue lines were changed. In the original, she said,
"You saved me, Sonic. I was afraid I'd never be able to flirt with you again."
well, now she says,
"You saved me, Sonic. I'll be sure to return the favor next time around."
Not really worrying about that right now, Amy.
I guess the issue is that it removes a line implying some kind of romance. Personally, I like the change because I think the old one just furthers the notion of her having one personality trait in Generations, but for the other side of the argument, I also have evidence that people are being reactionary about this one because if you save her as classic Sonic, she now says,
"I have always thought that you were cute, but did you get cuter?"
yeah, originally she said you look younger. Changing it from younger to cuter is undeniably throwing more bones in for the shipper community, which I'm not a part of. Not to get on my high horse, but personally I think this whole debacle is a symptom of the reactionary antagonistic discussion Twitter has fostered in everything, even outside of video games. There's still tons of examples of them having the slight romantic relationship. Anyways, that's a very long time spent ranting about something I should not be discussing in a video about Shadow the fucking Hedgehog. So let's wrap up my Sonic Generations thoughts. Overall, I think this is the new best way to play the game. The script is slightly better since everyone's slightly more in character, with even Cream now saying Mr. Sonic instead of just Sonic when he saves her. But like I said, everyone besides the main 4 had no substantial changes, and the changes they did make fall more in line with the characters at the cost of some comedy. The one and only new line that I truly cringed at was this Time Stone reference. Not because it's a reference, but because every line surrounding it is unchanged to accommodate. Really, the biggest issue is what they didn't do, particularly some quality of life things, but I can talk about that with the Shadow portion, which has the quality of life changes I wish were in Sonic's parts. Shadow the Hedgehog. By far, my favorite character in the Sonic series. He absolutely captivated me when I first played Sonic Adventure 2. His mystery, his angst, the design. Everything about him fucked hard. As I mentioned in the Frontiers video, Sonic Adventure 2 was the first Sonic game I actually owned myself, so it was easy for him to leave an impression on me. His final moment especially caught me emotionally in a way that no other games had up until that point. Which, keep in mind, I was pretty young with low reading capabilities, so I hadn't really played many RPGs at the time. Though even besides that, I still feel SA2 has the best finale in the series, and that mainly came from how strong Shadow was as a character. At this point in the series, we hadn't seen any characters go through as full of an arc with a backstory, motives, supporting characters, and conclusion. Knuckles kind kinda had that going. But of course, the jump from Sonic 3 on Genesis to Adventure 2 on Dreamcast brought with it technological advantages, making richer stories more attainable. Because of how good his story was, it even made me feel real iffy when they announced he was coming back in Heroes. Even as a 5-year-old, I had this weird understanding of story integrity. But either way, he came back due to the extreme popularity. I forgot about story integrity because I was 5, give me a fucking break. And I had fun playing Sonic Heroes over and over, because the game makes you play it over and over. Though it especially piqued my curiosity into Shadow's identity. A few scenes introduced an idea that we actually play as a clone Shadow during the events of Sonic Heroes, rather than the original Shadow the Hedgehog. So after beating it, I could only wonder who we saw in Heroes. Did Shadow really come back to life? Or did Eggman create a Shadow android to replace him? I remember tons of people for years debating on if it was the real Shadow, which is funny because the answer to that is secretly slipped into yep, his self-titled game. I don't think I really need to say it, it's a pretty infamous factoid, but if you wait, I think 10 minutes during Shadow the Hedgehog's final boss, which if I recall takes maybe like 6 minutes to beat tops, Eggman will tell you that you have actually been the real Shadow the whole time. Barely anyone heard this, and I think it was maybe like around when Colors came out that this got shared around more often. Anyways, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Shadow 05. I think the mission structure is dog shit. I don't feel Heroes' Carmex-covered graphic style lent itself to a serious tone as well as the lighter one, but I can't find it in myself to hate it like I do Sonic Unleashed. Unrelated, I think every hardcore Sonic fan has at least one Sonic game they just get unintelligently angry about. And for me, that's Unleashed. Go back to all my prior Sonic videos and take a shot for every stray it gets. Back on track, Shadow 05 still has the makings of a good Sonic game with the base used in Sonic Adventure, fun enough stages when you just run to the end, and maybe controversial to say, pretty well put together gunplay for a 3D platformer. While the story and atmosphere, I don't really hate it. Look, Shadow 05 has such a strange aura about it. Shadow is absolutely full of himself for half the game and going through various existential crises in the other half, all while heroes and villains alike persuade him into accomplishing various good or evil deeds. One moment you're a total badass with guns trying to shoot down W with crazy big beat ass music, then he's saving Cream and Cheese from having important roles in the game, and later he decides not to kill himself. Yeah. By the way, I've always liked to headcanon that all of the characters, especially Sonic, are so stupid and over the top in this game because you're looking at them from Shadow's perspective. I know it's more a causation of the change in English voice actors, but I still like my little idea since Omega and Rouge, the two characters Shadow respects the most, are not portrayed as over the top as the others. Given what I said, you might be able to figure out, I can't genuinely say I like Shadow the Hedgehog as a game. Most of my enjoyment comes partially ironically, and while I've gotten over it after nearly 20 years, I'm still not a big fan of them retconning part of Adventure 2's backstory. A sentiment tons of people shared, and as such, Sega mostly swept the events of Shadow 05 under the rug. No more Black Arms in any capacity, Shadow stops using guns, and a few characters like the President, Gun Soldiers, and the Ark lost any relevance in the series. Though Sega did equally move into a long era of solo one-off stories with only Sonic starting in Secret Rings not long later, so it's not fair to blame all this on Shadow 05. I gave a few more of my thoughts on it in my Eras of Sonic the Hedgehog video, so go there if you want more. It's somewhat of a shame in Shadow's case. For as many oddities 05 had in the story, I think the ending wrapped up his Amnesiac story really well. It set him up for brand new stories with the rest of the cast, especially Team Dark, and maybe making a difference in the world. But as I said earlier, they stopped using almost every character after 06. I've wanted Sega to try their hand at giving Shadow a big role again for years, maybe his own game. Because let's be real, we have a turbo slim list of what Sonic characters could carry and sell their own game. It's like Shadow, Knuckles, Power Gap to Tails. You're fucking kidding yourself if you think Silver is popular enough. And as a bonus for Sonic Team, Shadow's the only character you can mostly slap Sonic's gameplay style onto with minimal changes. So let's talk. Does Shadow carry his own game? Yeah, he fucking did. Everyone has already sung the praises of Sonic Cross Shadow Generations. And no, I don't mean Sonic fans this time. I mean everyone. Regular ass people loved it. At roughly this point in the Frontiers video, I said that spiel about how divisive the Frontiers reception was. I certainly loved it, but lots of people didn't. Well, with Shadow, that's not the case. It's an absolute blowout. Type in Sonic X Shadow Blow for evidence. Due to the generally negative reception of Shadow 05, a lot was riding on this one to make the character viable. He went from the literal coolest guy of all time to an edgelord because they gave him a gun one time. I think that's why they decided to devote the whole year to him. From April to December, it's Fearless Year of Shadow. We got a funny Shadow the Hedgehog costume with Sonic Superstars that Steam isn't letting me use because I'm bumming it off my friend through Steam Family, a fuck ton of minor mobile game appearances I don't give a shit about, a Lego set, Shadow the Batman, and a motherfucking motorcycle. Those are the things I won't talk about. What's important is the real media type things. Tales Tube episodes again, 2 comics, 3 animated shorts building up to Shadow Generations, of course the game itself, plus Sonic 3 in a month. Sega is lining up everything to make Shadow Generations a hit in preparation for the movie. And with the game's success, they've already called Ricci. They just gotta wait on that movie to hit it big. By the way, I'm getting into Mahjong lately. This time, the Tales Tube episodes didn't quite do the same as they did with Sonic Frontiers. For the Frontiers episodes, the goal was to reintroduce lore about the Chaos Emeralds in preparation for the ancient story, and just cement the core cast story. Well, for the new ones, they're a little less in-your-face about Shadow. He started by appearing in the Christmas episode before Year of Shadow proper. Here, he appeared next to the rest of Team Dark to make gift exchanges with the hero team. Which, holy shit, Omega's here! He's one of the top 2 most important characters that didn't get to show up in the original generations. With his triumphant return, he's rewarded with Hurrah! Shadow fucks off near the start because he only showed up due to Rouge telling him there was an emergency while everyone else has their fun gift giving, including this heart photo from Amy to Sonic. Amy fans, please look at everything before you force me into a 2-minute rant. I like near the end of this episode where after Eggman does his little scheme, Shadow comes back because he does care. Then the following episode, which was part of Year of Shadow proper, featured Sonic and Shadow talking about their past and relationship to each other, mainly solidifying how Sega plans to have the two of them treat each other going forward. Shadow steps back into his role as an extreme tsundere, and Sonic keeps pressing his buttons. I'll come back to it later, but I got a big ol' chuckle out of it here. I think the funniest part is how it only laser focuses on a few select games that doesn't include Shadow 05. I like to believe it's because Sonic and Tails don't consider that adventure important, since Sonic didn't save the day there. Could be the next one because it was Amy focused so that they could sell these tarot cards. The following Halloween special had a double whammy. It both introduced a new myth about King Boom Boom's origin as a greedy king, and had a little reminder about Gerald Robotnik's story. I especially liked the latter because it painted Gerald as a real bastard. Much of the Sonic series post-Shadow 05 makes him seem like a bit of a stand-up dude. Not that he's mentioned much, but they seem to really avoid the topic of him literally creating test tube life for immortality and then attempting to nuke the fucking Earth. He's a fucked up guy. Initially good intention because it's a story and he needs to be well-rounded, but he made a deal with the devil for those points. Also, it ends with Sonic giving Shadow some candy, which is pretty funny when you remember that even though Shadow was created 50 years ago and has the body of an adolescent hedgehog, he's probably had less than 5 years of sentience. All your fan art of Shadow giving Cream a gun is actually 2 preschoolers with heavy weaponry. I'll come back to the Tales Tube stuff a tiny bit later, but know that it's not nearly as important as it was with Frontiers. I want us to move over to the comics. Sega put out 2, one taking place on the Ark 50 years ago, and another starring Sonic Chow, or more accurately, Neutral Run Run Chow and Shadow Chow, Dark Run Run Chow, on their attempt to save the other Chow in tandem with Sonic and Shadow's stories in the game. The Chow comic is not much more than fan service and doesn't even have dialogue, but if you look close, you can see a bit of a reflection of Sonic and Shadow in the story. Written by Ian Flynn, who I forgot to mention is back as the lead writer for Shadow Generations, with art by Misa Shion and Minho Kim, it opens up with all of the Chow who showed up to Sonic's birthday party, including a bunch of normal neutral Chow, Sonic Chow, and Shadow Chow. All the Chow celebrate Sonic Chow for, I don't know, beating a bunch of babies at karate, while Shadow Chow sits out under a tree with a scowl. But then, the plot of Sonic Generation starts up, sucking up all of the Chow, from which point we witness the story told from Shadow Chow's perspective as he tries to save all the other Chow and help restore color to the world. Or that's what it seems they think is going on. It's actually Sonic 1 for Master System and Sonic 2 for Sega Genesis, process running in the background to get the color back like in the main game. After saving a few of them at the midway point of the story, neutral Double Run Chow shows up to compete with Dark Double Run Chow to save the other Chow. Though a little different from real Sonic, Chow Sonic only joins accidentally after he killed a Motobug while attempting to get his food, giving us that first hint that Chow Sonic ain't the smartest block fixing the clock before the funny finale, where a black arms creature appears to dine on the Chow, with only the Run Chow ready to fight back. With their eyes super closed, letting Shadow save the Chow without anyone noticing, resulting in the rest of them thinking Shadow Chow saved the day, making everyone love him. Perhaps it's a small hint that underneath Shadow's rough exterior, he's looking for the approval of someone else. And then for the second comic, this is difficult to talk about. Technically, it's not done yet, so I won't talk long on it. It's written and drawn by Yuki Imada, a mangaka that hasn't reached too big of an audience and none at all in English-speaking territories. Though maybe this can springboard some English fan groups to scanlate his past manga, because I'm actually a big fan of his art. The thick line work especially works for Shadow, who's a super dark character. Just like a lot of other Sonic manga, the jet black hedgehog, Shadow the Hedgehog, is published in Koro Koro Kamiku, a monthly magazine aimed at young kids, and I mean really young kids, around 3 to 9. This is where silly kids comics like Doraemon and Super Mario-kun come from, which is why it's extremely funny that right off the bat, the Shadow manga does Shadow's backstory. You know, the one where a 12-year-old gets shot. In chapter 1, we get a glimpse into Shadow's life on the Ark, starting fast with Shadow fighting off the Bio Lizard. Because yeah, when you think about it, technically they never said if Shadow saw the Bio Lizard for the first time in SA2, so it showing up here is pretty neat, especially with the way it moves. We see him busting up glass, chasing after scientists, and just generally moving more than he ever did in Adventure 2. So when Shadow busts in to kick his ass, it feels rad as hell. It gives us an idea that Shadow actually does this pretty often. Like the Bio Lizard is an escape artist dog he has to put back in the cage, and thanks to his strength of getting it done, all of the research assistants respect him. After that, we see the calmer and angstier sides to Shadow. We see him lament over his existence, how he had the sole purpose of saving Maria's illness, yet couldn't. It goes even deeper when a scene both here and in the animation we'll get to sees Shadow upset about his monstrous DNA that he had no choice in. A sad fate he can only work past through Maria lifting him up, which we get to see here. Back in Adventure 2 in Shadow, she was like extremely just a motivator for Shadow. Shadow told us, the player, she was an innocent girl and we took his word for it. Now they've shown why he said this. Every panel before she showed up was either Shadow working to save people or brooding over his existence. Not happy moments. Her face is the first genuinely happy panel in the chapter. Thus, Shadow's able to work through his sinful existence thanks to her. Maybe he can even accept it if he can save her. Whoops. And saving her is what he needs to do when the gun raid begins. Just like in SA2, Gun plans to kill every single Ark scientist, experiment, and witness. It makes these scientists fearful for their lives and thus, as Yoda said, leads to hatred towards Shadow. The only person that doesn't even attempt to sell Shadow out is Maria. She's the only one that calls Shadow a person instead of an experiment, motivating Shadow to stop the gun soldiers with some really good art in the fight scene. The sense of motion is incredible in this manga. With only this one manga chapter, Maria went from a driving force for Shadow to a driving force for me to care about her. But of course, Shadow does fail in preventing Maria's death, which in this comic is where it breaks away from the game canon. In this comic story, the gun soldier that shot Maria was under the control of the Black Arms, which absolutely plays with the idea of Shadow's hatred of his DNA, but undermines the story of men fearing what they don't know from the original tale. After Maria sends Shadow into his escape pod, the story becomes an extreme alternate universe gamey advertisement more akin to usual Koro Koro publications, so I'm not gonna keep going into this one. As purely a method to get the audience finally liking Maria more, it succeeds. For the actual storyline afterwards, it's not done, so I'm not even gonna try talking about it. Though I will say, Shadow is extremely pissed off in chapter 2, which I love. It gives me vibes of his initial Radical Highway appearance when he skated through town like a madman. God, Radical Highway is so cool. Now, out of all all of the surrounding media in the lead up to Shadow Generations, the animated shorts, Dark Beginnings, had the most onlookers. After Mania, Frontiers, and Superstars, animated shorts have become a standard in the series, with Sega hyping up this one more than any of the past animations. It had a poster shown, I think, about a month before release, which actually premiered at a convention. I remember when that happened, someone uploaded a little handycam video that cut like a third of the screen and didn't even have the full first episode. Because yeah, instead of one big upload, we have 3 short episodes that totaled out to about 15 minutes. And by a landslide, this was the best of the shorts. The animation, direction, voice acting, everything had a giant step up. To go through it, episode 1 overlaps with the first manga chapter as an on-the-arc story looking into Shadow's psyche, while episodes 2 and 3 are mostly to set up Shadow Generations proper. The first one especially—
I'm just happy to spend time with you here while you both research.
Is amazing. It's full of fast-changing emotions and messes with the viewer's expectations hardcore. When it starts, we see Maria holding Shadow's arm, running towards something, giving longtime Sonic fans the idea that this is Maria's big death scene. But once they reach their stop, we see Maria actually took Shadow somewhere to lighten his mood, letting him see Aurora Borealis.
Localized entirely within your
Space Colony arc.
Yes.
If we're going to compare this to the manga version of them hanging out, it's a lot calmer. The manga had Maria talking more like a normal happy-go-lucky girl during this point, while the animation makes her a little more perfect, closer to her game counterpart of the past. And I think this is meant to reflect Shadow's perfect memory of her, because after that, the short gets crazy. The arc suddenly suffers damage from an attack by a Gizoid, a reference back to one of Gerald's journals in Sonic Battle. Thus, Shadow needs to go stop him, in the process giving us one of the best animated sequences in Sonic history. It first zooms out of Shadow and Maria right here to give us a full shot of the room that we've seen a lot in the series. Then Shadow skates down this long hallway in hopes of reaching the Gizoid before he does too much damage. And instead of showing him winding around every direction that he must have gone to get there, it immediately takes us to the Gizoid and Gerald. Here, Shadow has a hand-to-hand fight with the Gizoid, featuring absolutely captivating lighting, and something I didn't see other people talk about, no music. We only hear the grunts and sound effects of the fight, which I think builds up to the, not an explosion in the kaboom sense, I mean Shadow's mind. Because then we see a trippy visual of war criminal Gerald on the chair, Maria yelling for assistance, gun soldiers doing what they do, Shadow existentialing, and finally ending on the moon, which for the first time since Sonic Adventure 2 is broken again, showing that the entire event was only a memory of Shadow's, maybe when he's having due to what's next in episode 2. Episode 2 sees Shadow raiding Eggman's pyramid base in an attempt to reach the Space Colony arc. He has a feeling that the Black Arms have returned, and I guess he plans to use the teleporter in the pyramid to get there. But as told by Rouge when she and Omega arrive, it's not possible to reach the arc through Eggman's pyramid now. So instead, she offers to get Shadow a rocket under the sole condition that he comes to Sonic's birthday, reminding us when this takes place and giving us that first little hint of why he didn't show up at the party. And the rest of that second episode is Shadow lamenting about the Black Arms DNA, I already talked about that a little, and a really cool fight scene. It's about the same positives as episode 1's animation. Moving into episode 3, Shadow, Rouge, and Omega break into a gun base to steal their rocket ship, in the process fighting through many gun robots and a Blue Falcon pilot. Most of this short is pure action, and it's really good at it. We see Omega getting a short moment in the limelight, Shadow using chaos control in a way that may hint at the main game, and actual humans, which is awesome. Sega's been so scared of any humans other than Eggman since Unleashed, and I think this is when they've really nailed them. It's only one gun pilot and the gun commander who's finally given his name from the Archie comics, Abraham Tower, but despite the small number, they nailed the art. I always wanted a look closer to what X did for the humans, but you know, with some better character design. Yeah, I know the hate is forced today, but Chris and his friends looked like every other toy commercial anime cast with less sauce. Which is why it's also kind of crazy how much sauce Abe has. Like damn, I couldn't take this bootlicker serious at all in Shadow 05, probably because I can't help but associate him with some War on Terror vibes, but now I have a small ounce of respect for him, though not nearly as much as I have for Shadow. He absolutely destroys the Blue Falcon. He throws rockets back at it, freezes time, and even has the decency to help the pilot escape before it blows up. Though sadly, as Shadow was about to escape Earth to the Ark, Gun's self-defense system goes into full force to stop him, making it seem like Team Dark failed their mission. That is until Abe uses his high command to stop it, and by extension, proving his forgiveness to Shadow. A first for him in the series. Okay, unless you count hard mode of Shadow 05, I don't know if we should. Let's just move forward. Short 3 ends with a heart-wrenching AMV of Shadow and Maria while he rocks to the Ark that a lot of people lost their shit over. It didn't quite do that for me, though I'll be honest, I cried a little when I finally saw Omega getting a moment, so I guess the tears already left me. Either way, I loved these shorts. It makes me care about Maria, humans have an art style I want to see going forward, action is peak in the series, and seeing Team Dark together again made me so happy. If Ian Flynn can keep writing them like this rather than the Sega mandates written version from the past, then I'd love to see him write an IDW arc starring them. Though I think the short's greatest strength was the look into Shadow's psyche. We have not gotten to do that since Sonic 06, and in my opinion not well since Shadow 05. Shadow's actually thinking hard about his past, his relationships, and his DNA. While he came to learn his past in Shadow 05, he never had the chance to move past who helped create him, because the game ended. These shorts set up Shadow's journey of grief that he'll go through in Shadow Generations. Finally, we get into Shadow Generations itself. Cutting to the chase, I'm not gonna hide spoilers at all. I do have this pure gameplay and level design section timestamped, though keep in mind that I may let a thing or two slip back in about the story. With that said, let's dive in. Shadow Generations opens up directly after the shorts. Shadow himself looks down on the Earth from atop the space colony, thinking back on his past, while Rouge bitches about him skipping Sonic's birthday.
There's free food.
With this new information, and by that I mean this weird universal crack, not the free food, Shadow rushes straight into level 1, based on Final Rush, and Final Chase, and somewhat the arc levels from Shadow 05, let's come back to that later. This first stage changes the game for boost Sonic levels in every way fans are used to, plus keep focusing on the story for now. 2/3 into the level, we get a huge reveal. Black Doom makes his triumphant return, a reveal no one could have seen coming, unless you watched any of the trailers or looked at the title screen. Black Doom uses his power, which I must assume the Time Eater amplified somehow, to quickly warp Shadow back to Radical Highway. Doomy wants Shadow to accept his Black Arm's DNA and team back up with him. Shadow, of course, doesn't want to do that, so he beats him up. Poking Doom's eye out results in Shadow safely returning to the Ark, where he finds the fake yellow Chaos Emerald Tails and Sonic used to stop the Ark's cannon from launching, making it so Shadow has both yellow emeralds right before Time Eater eats everything up, sending him to his own white space. A much different white space from Good Game Sonic and Bad Game Sonic's. It's an actually open 3D area we need to look around in. But before we can look around, we need to go back to the Ark for Act 2, which shockingly enough has a little story thing going inside. Midway in, Black Doom comes back to gift Shadow the big gimmick of the game, his first Black Arms mutation. In this case, wings that sprout out of his back, giving him the gift of flight. A very broken ability which allows Shadow to easily fly over the stage, which we don't get back until near the end of the campaign. So we're gonna put that aside. But Shadow's not. Like, that was weird as hell. Up until now, his Black Arm's DNA hasn't affected his own biology. It places a lot of questions and fears into Shadow. Even though he felt cursed by it and feared something could go wrong with it, he still looked like a hedgehog with that blood inside him. But now, the awful alien DNA that Gunn and even the Ark researchers feared has changed him. Could coming into closer contact with Black Doom make him more like a Black Arms alien? This question haunts Shadow for the rest of the story. And we'll come back to that later, we need to play the actual video game for a while. Shadow Generations follows Sonic Frontier's footsteps with two different gameplay modes. One open zone where you accomplish tiny mini-tasks, and dedicated arcade-type stages. But since this is a smaller scale game meant to complement Sonic Generations, the time spent in the open zone is significantly subdued compared to Frontiers, and we spend far more time in the action stages. Shadow Gen's open zone works way closer to how Adventure 1 and Unleashed did, where they primarily feed you into the action stages and contextualize the story, or at least as much as it can contextualize. Don't forget, we're still playing Sonic Generations, so the setup is still a simple big monster monster sent you to a new world. But going off that, we get something pretty fun due to Sonic going on his journey at the same time. Recall this, every time you beat one of the 9 zones in Sonic Generations, you saved one of your friends, meaning that only 9 Sonic characters could appear besides the rivals. So for Shadow, his supporting cast includes those that couldn't make it to Sonic Gens, which thankfully connect to his story more than Sonic's, with the no-brainer starter of E123 Omega, a character absent from Sonic's story and Shadow's greatest cheerleader. No, really, almost all of Omega's dialogue is telling Shadow how fucking cool he is, or how cool he himself is. My favorite, in the funny sense at least, is him theorizing that since Shadow has Black Arm's DNA, he should see if he can turn his hand into a gun. Because, you know, it's arms in the military definition. Though on a more serious note, Omega staying in white space with Shadow the longest casually re-cements Omega's standing both in Team Dark and his relationship to Shadow. Let me explain. Omega's always been a little weird. By definition, Team Dark needs to some extent reflect the hero team or the light team. Sonic Adventure 2 spent a lot of time making sure that all 6 characters from the 2 teams had a proper rivalry. Rouge hunts for gems and is a master of espionage, while Knuckles protects the biggest gem in the world, plus sometimes is a treasure hunter himself, and is an innocent man who wears his thoughts on his chest. Eggman and Tails are both mechanical geniuses that plot out their team's plans of action, while Sonic and Shadow literally set a new gold standard for rivals up there with Vegeta and Virgil. It made the ending, where all 7 of the main characters team up because Amy was there too, feel more grand. Shit got so bad that these guys who hated each other put aside their differences for the greater good. Then Sonic Heroes came out. Sonic Heroes introduced the iconic speed, flight, power formation mechanic. Everyone within each team made sense. No one expected Big to take Team Rose's flight role, but it did have a little issue for Team Dark. Rouge took on the flight role because she has wings, which, you know, makes sense. But now she's mechanically not in opposition with Knuckles. She's opposing Tails, who she didn't have any relationship with at the time, so they kept her mainly opposing Knuckles narratively for the 3 cutscenes these characters share, thereby leaving Tails and Omega without much of an opposing force. And then not a single game going forward tried to make these 2 oppose, reflect, or relate to each other. I can think of 2 times total in the series where they interact. Both of them only had Tails fixing Omega. I bring this up because Omega's somewhat the closest thing Shadow's gotten to a sidekick. Besides when Omega is Rouge's sidekick. They have a joint custody deal going on. Though Omega doesn't just hang out with Shadow at all times like Tails does for Sonic. He's often going out to kill Eggman robots by himself because he's a very serious guy. Though so is Shadow. I don't think there's any parts of the series where Shadow and Omega just hang out without some kind of preconceived notion that they're about to destroy Eggman robots. Like, I could have sworn Omega had a larger role in Shadow 05, but I double checked and he's only in 2 stages in 1 route. I guess he left a pretty strong impression in that route, maybe partially because it's the no missions route and both of his stages are back to back. I bring that up because I feel that route had Shadow and Omega's relationship in its purest form. As serious, objective-focused guys, neither of them need to pretend when they're with each other. They respect the other's actions and boundaries and help their partner work through their goals, which Omega does when he's not cheerleading Shadow and himself. He warns Shadow about locations, bosses, questions if he should kill Sonic or Metal Sonic to prove his strength. Honestly, he finally feels more like a sidekick here than he ever has before. Kinda like Shadow's own Tails from this era of games, where he was just the sidekick. Now, I'm not saying that this is where his character should have always gone, and I'm not even saying this is the perfect role for him, but if Sega intends to keep Omega in this little 3rd tier of popularity slot, then maybe it's smart to simplify him like this. Unlike Blaze, Shadow, Cream, Rouge, SBO, Mighty, and the list goes on, they can't slap some of Knuckles, Tails, or Sonic's mechanics onto Omega. He needs something wholly unique because of his personality and build. So maybe leaning into the sidekick role can help finally build up some kind of parallel between Tails and Omega. Of course, he's not a strategist like Tails, so they can't have the same type of rivalry Tails had with Eggman, but maybe they can play with that difference. Maybe they work together and start having trouble since Omega goes right for the goal while Tails wants to go slow. And that's why I find it so fitting that Omega is the first character you meet up with in Shadow Gens. He represents the most recent person Shadow has met and doesn't hate, plus the person who challenges his personality the least. And don't worry, I won't spend this long on the other characters we meet, because then back to to white space after the first beatdown on Doom, Shadow finds a little Shadow the Hedgehog logo. Using said recognizable Sega-owned visual, Shadow can trade it in for a brand new Black Arms ability, which replaces both the guns and vehicles from past titles. Now, by bringing color back to the arc and getting this new ability, Shadow can move on over to the next zone based on Rail Canyon from Heroes and meet up with Shadow's other best friends, Orbot and Cubot, which I don't think they've ever talked before now? At the very least, not canonically, it's only their second appearance. Orbot and Cubot are just here for a little side quest where you look for all of their nuts and bolts around the world to get an achievement and fucking nothing else. Truly, not worth your time unless you really want that platinum. I enjoy their appearance here. It's a little obvious Shadow doesn't have many friends to pick from due to their inclusion, but hey, whatever, it's time for gameplay. Chapter users, welcome back. So by now in the story, you should understand the general structure, because it's just Sonic Generations with a Frontiers open zone stapled on. Shadow runs through a 2-act zone from somewhere else in the timeline, saves a Sonic character, plays through a few extra missions, fights a boss from Shadow's past, and at some point between those steps, he earns a new edgy Black Doom ability. To simplify discussion going forward, and because the trailer spoiled it, Shadow revisits the arc from Sonic Adventure 2 and Shadow 05, though mostly the SA2 version, Rail Canyon from Sonic Heroes, Kingdom Valley from Sonic 06. Technically, he first visits Sunset Heights from Forces and Chaos Island from Frontiers, plus ends his journey back at Radical Highway. With the exception of Radical Highway, Act 1 is completely 3D and Act 2 is completely 2D. I'm slightly bummed about this because the switch between 2D and 3D is one of the main appeals of the boost formula to me, though if I think back, a lot of my favorite 2D portions in a boost game usually come from purely 2D stages. Shadow Generations at least uses this dimensional divorce to ensure that a 3D and 2D stage focus on their dimension, so I'll give it a pass and y'all will know why later. Now, despite coming out after Sonic Frontiers, I made the conscious choice while playing to avoid comparing it to Frontiers, barring the hub world. I know that might seem a little weird because Frontiers is the newest game and this is a good game like Frontiers and not what people say about the stuff in between Generations and Frontiers, but let me explain what I mean. While everyone's talking about Shadow Generations like this big, brand new, all different game, it's important to keep in mind that this is a complement to Sonic Generations. No matter what, the gameplay needs to feel closer to Sonic Generations than any other Sonic game. And so Shadow Generations goes back to the tried and true boost formula, which if you've gotten this far into the video, then I honestly have a hard time believing you don't know what the basics of the boost gameplay is. So explaining it here, it seems kind of fucking pointless. Plus it would get annoying when I eventually retrospect the solo era of Sonic and put this at the end of said playlist. Now, since this is a Shadow boost game instead of a Sonic boost game, Sonic Team's altered how Shadow works a little, in a way that, honestly, I think perfects Shadow. Ever since they brought Shadow back in Heroes, they struggled to find a way to mechanically differentiate Shadow from Sonic in a fun way. And in Shadow Generations, it shows off how fucking easy it is to differentiate him through things they already had. For a while there, Sega's answer on how to make Shadow unique was to make him more of a fighter than Sonic. For Sonic Heroes, that meant more enemies per stage, which isn't too bad since you can use Omega, and then the same for Sonic 06's Shadow story, where it does suck because Shadow's combat is repetitive as fuck. Well then, Shadow 05's answer was of course. In my opinion, the combat focus never worked. If they want a combat character, there's Knuckles. Then they also tried out the Chaos control powers, including Time Stop since Sonic Heroes, a Chaos Spear attack since the final boss of Shadow, and Chaos Blast that doesn't come back in any form. And then the other thing that they tried out was vehicles. I don't think it's too controversial to say the past games all either didn't use these to their fullest potential, or it sucked to use. I've never talked to someone who reaches a Black Vault section in Shadow 05 and shouts, "Holy fuck, I love playing shitty Panzer Dragoon!" Mainly because Sonic fans don't play games from other series. For that reason, I'm very happy to say that Shadow Generations implements those two latter aspects, maybe not perfectly, but at like a 90% success rate. So going into what really changed from Sonic Generations. Shadow can no longer drift. I don't believe he ever naturally lightspeed dashes. He warps to an enemy instead of dashes towards them during a homing attack, and he can't do the bounce or spin dash if you want to compare him to Frontiers. So yeah, not much is really gone. The only thing that really sucks is the lack of a drift, though thanks to them removing the drift, Shadow has 2 extra buttons freed up. So with those open buttons, Sonic Team could give Shadow moves, Chaos Control, and Chaos Spear. Both of them together, which I believe is the first time you can actually do, besides the Shadow 05 final boss. By default, Shadow has the Chaos Spear mapped to triangle and Chaos Control on L2, which I recommend swapping immediately. They work like this. The Chaos Spear is Shadow's ranged projectile. He uses it to stun enemies and on hidden switches to open new paths, while Chaos Control allows you to completely freeze time when activated, including your timer after filling the meter up. I want to mention these two abilities first because Sonic Team designed every piece of Shadow Generation stages around these two abilities and the Black Arms upgrades we'll get to. Looking back at stage 1 where it introduces these mechanics, it throws a ton of these missiles at you. Missiles that either create a path for you to cross over a pit or block your path as a wall. So if you want to not take damage or fall down to a slower path, you need to learn how to properly use Chaos Control, turning those missiles into your path or getting them out of your way. But that's just on the basic side, because as you continue, there's lots to learn about it, mainly when to use it. Besides the first stage where they're teaching it to you so they throw tons of Chaos Control boxes at you, Shadow can't spam it. He needs to build up the meter by killing enemies or finding Chaos Control boxes, which might make you think it's about saving it for a tricky situation or some kind of gimmick, when that's not entirely true. Even when you stop time, you still rack the meter back up when killing enemies. As soon as time resumes, the Chaos Control meter catches up to what you deserve, which means that if you come up on a room with a few enemies and you have Chaos Control meter, there's not much point in not activating it. For me, Chaos Island is a really fun one for keeping the Chaos Control as long as possible due to how many enemies you can find. It gives you a little leeway too at this room, for example, because while you want to stay on the upper path like in most Sonic games, if you fall down, these enemies here can help you get a Chaos Control. It's a mechanic that makes even your failures not as rough if you know how to use it. Now with said strategy, you can still fuck up big time. You can come into a situation where you're one enemy away from having enough meter, but hey, the appeal of Sonic is to keep replaying the stages to map out a better route, so if you're into the tech enough that you're thinking about this at all, then that's likely what you wanted. And boy, I hope you wanted that, because Shadow Generations has entire routes you can't reach without Chaos Control, both through platforms that you need to freeze time to use, and these green lights that send Shadow onto a path reminiscent of the Lightspeed Dash. These help you skip substantial chunks of level or lead to a new path, plus maintain the frozen timer. So what you really want to do is jump into one right before the timer runs out. But you still also need to hold onto your meter for specific parts of the stage. I think we can look at Rail Canyon for a really good example of somewhere you need to save it up. Both acts of Rail Canyon have small trains and big trains that sometimes blow up the rails. So if you don't want Shadow to get isekai'd back to the weird manga timeline with a dumb little mascot boy, you need to freeze time. And in Shadow Generations, there's way more rails than there were in the original game. So even right now, I'm kinda thinking about turning the game back on and testing what happens if I go on some other silly rail that looks like nothing. Honestly, it's a shame that they hadn't attempted to implement Chaos Control again like this since Heroes. On its own, this would have made Shadow Generations stick out compared to the somewhat stagnating boost system, but that's only the beginning. Shadow's Chaos Spear, Air Boost, and Homing Attack are wild. I know those three things sound partially unrelated, but give me a minute here. Shadow has some strange physics compared to Boost Sonic, especially in the air. Sonic in Generations has, in my opinion, the perfect control for him in the Boost games. I feel like I have just the right amount of control of him on ground, in the air, while drifting, or anywhere despite getting his speed up so high. Quite frankly, if Sega kept this forever, I'd die a happy fan. Well, for Shadow, he's a little stiffer. He's not a weird, slippery chonk like Unleashed Sonic, but Sonic Generation Sonic, Shadow not be. In fact, I'm fairly certain they based him upon the Sonic Forces physics. Both games replace the air dash with a double jump and have busted air boosts. In Sonic Generations, you want to avoid boosting in the air unless you have full confidence you can land onto solid ground. And if you don't have confidence, then go ahead and use the air dash. It's a safer option in small areas since it only goes a short distance. An option Shadow obviously doesn't have anymore since they replaced his homing attack with a homing teleport. Well, for the air boost, you'll notice that if you boost in some direction, Shadow's gonna stick where he's heading and keep his momentum going longer than Sonic. This makes it significantly easier to aim than Sonic's and lets you skip bigger gaps. it becomes essential that you can control your air boost because Shadow Generations has by far the most open-ended stages in boost history. Getting to the real appeal of Shadow Generations, Sonic Team has crafted gigantic stages that allow for loads of player expression. With the time stop, teleport attack, and busted air boost, Shadow can go all which directions he pleases. And more than that, Sonic Team actually designed these paths to direct yourself. One of the biggest flaws I've seen thrown at the boost formula as a whole since Unleashed is that many levels do have a dedicated good player path and a dedicated bad player path. If you play good, you go on the cool path with goodies. If you play bad, fuck you. And I have two ideas on this. On one hand, it allows the level designers to know exactly where to put set pieces that a player can't miss, and this design follows most closely to the classic game where the top path often contained the best goodies. On the other, it does eventually result in most casual players sticking to the same single path they learned through arcadey trial and error. As much as I love Sonic Generations, I think Shadow Gens took the right call by shaking this up. Sonic Generations already perfected that formula, so why not give us a slightly different one? Every 3D stages has what feels like an infinite amount of ways to go through the level. From frame 1 of the arc, you can already see a separate grind rail you can hop on with a 3-path split not long later. We have never seen this many dedicated paths in a boost game, because these aren't just little ways to get somewhere else 5 seconds faster. Some of these splits can take you to whole 20-second paths different from a way you could have gone. One of my favorite examples to use is this extra mission at Rail Canyon. I'm pretty sure the real stage also has this path split, but it's condensed in this mission, so I'm going to use it as the example. It's a simple reach the end with 100 rings mission, so of course you want to find the route with the most rings. Like most missions in the boost games, it's about 1 minute long, but within that minute, you have such varied paths to go down that you essentially have 3 full-ass stages. You can go straight down the obvious path, rail boost up to this top path and go from there, or for you really curious boys, rail boost up to this top path, break the barrel next to you for a spring, and traverse an even higher path. It's absolutely insane. I don't feel like any of the other 4 boost games ever designed this many paths, at least not in the 3D sections. Plus, a player can't just decide to air boost and skip everything, because you still need to fight a little, or else you don't get any chaos control, meaning you miss out on chaos control requiring paths and suffer a higher time. By the way, time attack communities have split hard on how to classify this. I think right now speedrun.org has whole game runs as your full playtime, and single stage runs let you use in-game time, which makes sense given the full game time includes load times, overworld, and the Sonic X Shadow cutscenes you try to skip. From the videos I'm seeing, because fuck no, I'm not good enough for this, these single stage runners absolutely abuse the hell out of chaos control, while full game runs save it for perfect moments. Kingdom Valley's a good example. Kingdom Valley Act 1 has the least ceilings and high walls, meaning the most points you can air boost over. Only a few parts set you up on rails. Like, it's not an exaggeration to say you can skip half of it, mainly thanks to one other accidental mechanic. So do y'all remember the homing dash from Frontiers? The clearly not intended exploit that lets you fly grand distances, the one that everyone, including Kishimoto himself, had so much fun with that they chose to leave it in? But yeah, Shadow Gens has something similar. It turns out that if you use the Chaos Spear in the air, Shadow maintains his current momentum rather than slow down a little. This means that if you spam that Chaos Spear right after air boosting or boost jumping, you can fly further. Skips go from pretty cool to absolutely insane. It makes me feel like Sonic Team knew the primary audience for this was Sonic fans, and so they opened it up as much as possible. Like, if you have not played a boost game, do not start here. Play Sonic Generations first. You can't buy them separately, so there's no excuse to not play the easier game first. Probably a better comparison to use is the 2D levels, because these mostly follow the Generations formula. Only now, instead of knowing when to boost and jump, you need to factor in your chaos control too. For just the 2D stages, I think Sunset Heights Act 2 is my favorite. Act 1 didn't use the egg robos for much besides a really cool cutscene that I'm guessing hides a load screen, while Sonic Team designed all of Act 2 around these guys. As you progress, they shoot down the platforms in front of you, so unless you can use chaos control at the right time, you may lose out on some rings and goodies. Sometimes you need to wait for them to shoot down the platforms, so it also gives players a good way to gauge how far they should aim for during each time stop. It's an amazing mechanic. I really can't stress how well put together Shadow Generation stages are. Any Sonic fan who wants to test their creativity in harder stages need to play this. Though if we're going to say one nitpick with them, why don't we look back at Sonic Generations for a minute? One issue a friend of mine pointed out, and the importance of this can vary by player, is that the stages don't exactly have the same level of progression Sonic Generations had. Pretty much every Sonic Generation stage, both for modern Sonic and classic Santiago, follow a nice progression with a big split near the start, slower platform challenges that introduce the stage gimmick expands, crazy set piece moment, easier breather moment before the goal. Every level felt like a full celebration of Sonic. Shadow Generations doesn't have that. While the platforms and routes are well designed to test your skills, the individual tests don't have the same type of connection Sonic Generations had. Like in Chaos Island, I feel like this room near the middle is by far the hardest, and this big grind rail moment right after is the set piece moment, meaning the second half is just speedy platform challenges. Although again, well-made challenges from a mechanical point. This room in particular has quite a few hidden routes that I spent a while discovering, but I think ending with this grind rail would have made the level stick more. Again, this is not my complaint, it's my friend's, but he worked as a programmer on Penny's Big Breakaway at Evening Star, so I feel like in the Sonic sphere, his opinion might have some weight. Anyways, I don't have much footage to show for the crazy tech I talked about as of writing this, and for damn sure it won't be as cool as the speedrunners once I go back for it, but I'm absolutely going to keep replaying these stages well after I'm done with this video. I could keep going on and on about the individual stages and their paths because honestly, I feel like I'm barely scratching the surface, but there's so much more I gotta get to. Like the open zone. I've seen some crazy praise for this, and yeah, it's fine that you like it. I won't argue with you. I had fun the entire time, but honestly, I'm not as in love with it as I was with Sonic Frontiers. I'm glad it exists. I prefer this over the borderline level select screen hub world of Sonic Generations, but I just don't think it hits the same as Sonic Frontiers, and yeah, here's the part where we need to make the comparisons. So of course, Shadow Generations is a much smaller game than Frontiers, meaning we also get a significantly smaller open zone, to the point where it kinda gives me vibes of an older platformer hub world like Mario 64, honestly I thought Gex 2 because it's all white. You mainly use the hubs to feed into the action stages, and as such, a majority of what you can do connect back to the action stages. We only have 3 objectives out here. Find bolts and screws for Orbot and Cubot side quest, complete little side challenges these things give you, and hunt for treasure chests that can give you gallery items including artwork, entries to Gerald's journal, explanations of past games, and music tracks that you can play in the game, similar to Sonic Generations. Which, real quick, the music selection of old tracks is top tier here. I'm not really in love with the new remixes, they're fine enough, but since I replayed levels a bunch, having a few of my favorite SA2, Heroes, Forces, and shockingly, Sonic Frontiers tracks help me not get bored of it. Not adding more tracks and having the music still loop upon death and reset in the Sonic Generations Remaster might be the biggest miss for that. These 2 small additions made a world of differences when mapping new routes in Shadow. Anyways, I'll start with the treasure. We have a shit ton of these to find. Over 90, I think? Each of which requiring a certain type of medallion that you find in the action stages and challenge missions. These replace the red rings, and I think their placement is some of the best for collectibles in a boost game, or at the very least the best since Colors. Despite only having 3 per stage instead of 5 like Colors onwards, I found that collecting these provoked experimentation more than in past titles, mainly because they also show up in the challenge missions. These challenge missions keep the level design from the main stages closer than Sonic Generations did, where they jumbled shit up with blocks and lock paths a ton, so after I searched all around the challenge mission areas for medals, it gave me new ideas on where to try going in the real stage later. By perfecting these, I truly felt like I learned the stages better for testing my times. But I've sucked the stages dicks a lot already, let's go back to the open zone. Unlike Sonic Generations, where you just get the gallery item for finding the red rings, you now need to find the treasure chests in white space. They're either hidden away behind boxes, at the end of some platform challenges, or just sitting there. As long as you check every nook and cranny of white space, which isn't very hard after you obtain every Doom upgrade, you'll find every chest. Shadow Generations open zone absolutely does not aim for what Frontiers had. Frontiers wanted you to have a large, sprawling world to discover, well, this is literally a white void. Like, writing this now, I'm tempted to call Shadow Generations open zone simple busy work, but I feel like that doesn't work in this situation. Typically, I'd call something that if I found it repetitive, long-winded, and just generally not fun. However, Shadow Generations had the perfect short length of open zone discovery where I never had that feeling while playing, and I think that mainly comes from how it's segmented. They sectioned off multiple parts of the map to naturally make you get used to the new Doom powers. A multi-lock Chaos Spear, Super Strike that can help Shadow warp long distances after throwing a Black Arm Soldier, Manta Ray to surf on water, Doom Squid Game to Splatoon swim on different surfaces, and Wings to skip shit. Mechanically, these remind me a little bit of the Wisp from Sonic Colors, only once you get them, they're a part of Shadow for the rest of the game. Kinda. Besides White Space, where everything is used, the Squid is only used in Chaos Island and 2 bosses, the Surf ability is only used in Kingdom Valley Act 1, Sunset Heights Act 2 and 2 bosses, and the Doom Wings are an ability you choose to have on or off before starting a level. Because they're kinda broken, and Sonic Team had the wise decision to give you 2 different ranks depending on if you use them or not. I'm sure my tone of voice makes it sound like I'm gonna say they underutilize the Doom powers or call them super shitty because they're barely in the game, but no. I'm feeling the exact opposite. Shadow's full transformation abilities are very gimmicky. Yes, they maintain the feeling of high-speed action when you use them, but you're not using Shadow's innate moveset anymore, which is why I think it's good that these are downplayed so much. It makes them feel closer to a cool stage gimmick like the Hourglasses in Pyramid Cave or the Buggy in Seaside Hill. For the most part, I'd call these a quick little diversion to keep you on your toes. An aspect of Sonic that we've seen all the way back since Sonic 1. Now, back in relation to the open zone, the segmentations especially helped me out for the Squid power. It's by far the most complex Doom power by the metric of, what fucking button do I press to do the thing? Because the explanation really isn't that good. While using it, a normal player might expect a normal Spider-Man swing type maneuver, and it can do that, but also if you hold back on the analog stick until you reach directly under the Doom testicle you used to swing on, Shad Squid jumps directly upwards. You need to know this if you want to grab every medal in Chaos Island or beat Act 1 with a good time. Or maybe abusing Chaos Spear helps you beat it faster, I don't know, you figure it out. I could not for the life of me get that far in Chaos Island, so I looked up the mechanic online, and even with someone else's explanation, I still needed time to practice it. White Space gave me that good chance to do as such without any worries about ruining my time, and I got tiny little goodies for practicing. I didn't feel like I wasted my time getting the goodies because I used that time to get better with the mechanics. So the main point I'm trying to reach with White Space, it is not nearly as in-depth as Frontiers, but it's not trying to be. It works for practicing skills to use in the stages while rewarding you for doing as such. Now, very likely, I'm probably going to skip getting 100% out here on full game replays. Besides the extra tracks in the jukebox, I don't think the rewards connect back to the other parts of the game like they did in Frontiers, so I don't have the same motivation to return when my 100% save already exists. For anyone that's still attempting to avoid spoilers, this is where you should step away. All I have left to say relates back to the story. Though before I switch over, looking back, I feel like I might even be selling these new stages a little short. I've never felt this free in a 3 Sonic level besides Adventure 1 and a few cyberspace stages, mainly the ones added to Final Horizons. But unlike Frontiers, where the freedom only feels half intentional and the fun comes from how much you can break it, the fun in Shadow Generations feels at least like 9/10 intentional. I just have bosses left to talk about for gameplay, which some people might consider spoilers, apparently not Sega's marketing team, so just know they're either the new best in the series or second best after Sonic Frontiers. I gotta think about it a little more. I'll leave the gameplay at this. Shadow Generations is my new second favorite of the Boost games, and it's fighting hard against Sonic Generations for that #1 place. But luckily they're sold together so I can cheat and not think about it too hard. While Sonic Generations celebrated all things Sonic from the cast, the locales, and the music, Shadow Generations celebrates purely the character of Shadow the Hedgehog, while forcing him to confront what his existence means. I think looking back on the animation can give us the jumpstart to the possibilities. Shadow could take on the mantle of a hero protecting the Ark like when he fought Emerald, a pawn of Gerald's to help destroy the Earth like in SA2, Omega and Rouge's ally such as in Heroes, or even humanity's aloof savior like we saw in Shadow the Hedgehog. The same driving question Shadow the Hedgehog 2005 tried to ask, but I think the big difference comes comes from Shadow himself. In Shadow 05, Shadow still has the amnesia lingering from Sonic Heroes. He's trying to figure out the Shadow of the past. Does he have the express purpose to keep the Ark safe, destroy the Earth, or rule a new Eggman empire? Shadow began his question believing that he had a divine purpose he must follow. It then ended with him deciding to walk his own path and not let the past solely dictate his future. A good conclusion to a messy story overall. So what does Shadow Generations do differently? Well, now Shadow actively reflects on the past he remembers rather than figuring out what it was without context like some kind of Hedgehog Holmes. Shadow didn't know what happened with Sonic Adventure 2, he didn't know Gerald's story, he didn't know about his creation, and he didn't remember Maria when Shadow 05 began. Well now, since Shadow remembers everything, literally every aspect of everything haunts him. And yeah, the pre-release memes were absolutely on point. One True Sonic and Green-Eyed Fake Sonic went on the funny adventure thinking about how rad and cool their life has progressed, while Shadow disputes with his body, psyche, and belief system at every turn. Since I've already talked about their mechanics, let's talk about what the levels mean. Well, Sonic Generations chose which stages to remake through fan feedback. Each zone in Shadow Generations connects back to Shadow, the first two relating to his creation. Of course, Gerald created him on the Ark, and that's where he became a hero by sacrificing himself in Adventure 2, so his new big game needs to start there, at his literal inception and the inception of his heroism. Then Eggman mass-produced and stored Shadow androids at Rail Canyon, which caused Shadow to question his own existence, motivating his first existential crisis in 05. You could say Rail Canyon put Shadow on his path to his present, while the second set of stages represent his biggest failures. At Kingdom Valley, Shadow and Rouge accidentally allowed the Scepter of Darkness to shatter, releasing Mephiles, a huge mistake of Shadow's that led to entire societal collapse. While Shadow failed to protect Sunset Heights from Infinite, and Infinite made a Shadow clone rampage around the city, fooling the Resistance into thinking Shadow reverted to his old ways. I think it's fitting that these are the second two stages, because by this point, Shadow has amassed 4 of the Doom powers. He's capable of falling back on his Black Arm's DNA to solve his problems with extreme violence. Now, of course, Shadow himself doesn't know that the events I described occur in these two locations because forces later in the timeline, and 06 erased itself from it, but I don't think that's actually too important here. It seems like Black Doom does know about those events thanks to his all-seeing eye, leading to him presenting it to Shadow in hopes that it can still resonate with him, and probably more so the player. And I think that point I said resonates more in how he shows them Radical Highway. Black Doom has a hearty hard-on for Radical Highway. He sends you to a warped version of it 3 times in Act 1 of the Ark, Rail Canyon, and Sunset Heights, and it's the final zone of the campaign where it's absolutely insane. It's the only one where both acts are 3D, you can't use Chaos Control anytime you go there, and unless you know all of the shortcuts, you will not get an S rank. And Sonic Team hid those shortcuts this time. The first one, it's in this little hole. Who fucking goes there? I fucking love the final zone, and I kinda dig the mid-act versions too. They're a little easier than the main parts of the stage, so I felt like I could catch myself. But we're focused on the story-wise reason to go here. And I think Black Doom has an important reason to send Shadow here. If we think back to Adventure 2, we saw Shadow at his most fiendish while in Radical Highway. Shadow stole a Chaos Emerald, destroyed millions in military weaponry, framed Sonic, and he didn't feel any remorse for it. We never saw Shadow that evil ever again. Black Doom wants to bring Shadow back to his side by showing him like how really cool he looked when he did evil. It's such a sinister little plot of his. It's cool that they never just tell you this. This is only a little reading I had, and probably other people have said it by now too. Then for Chaos Island, we're gonna have to ignore that with lore. Sonic Team straight up said they only put it in because they really wanted to have a Frontiers level, and Shadow's not playable in that many games. I've seen some complaints about the lack of any Shadow 05 stage, but personally, I don't think there's any levels from 05 that isn't represented better by a stage from a different game. Why have Westopolis when you could have Radical Highway, for example? Sorry, that's the Black Doom in me talking.
And speaking of Black Doom, I think we should talk about him a little more. I find it interesting that he appeared at all. After Shadow 05, he seemed like the character Sega refused to acknowledge. No figures, plushes, spin-off references, the Black Arm seemed more blown from the franchise than their meteor. I'm pretty sure the first time they mentioned them since a fucking card in Sonic Rivals came from Eggman's logs in Frontiers. Though now that he's returned in Shadow Generations, I almost get the feeling they snuck that in real quick to lube us up. And in Black Doom's appearance here, they've chosen to lean heavier into the Christian devil motifs than before, most evident with his primary appearance. In Shadow Generations, his all-seeing eye takes the form of a giant sphere with an eye in the center and multiple rings around him, an appearance resembling the angel known as thrones in Christianity. Now, in Christianity, the ring eye design represents its cosmic awareness of not only the universe as it exists, but the universe in other times. In White Space, Doom sees all that has, will, and even could be, explaining why he's chosen such specific places to send Shadow. Thrones additionally sits closest to God, passing down his will to both angels lower in the hierarchy as orders, and as justice and guidance to humans and fallen angels in hell. You could say it shows mercy to those beneath it by guiding them. Perhaps Doom has taken this form to comfort Shadow into an idea that he's trying to bring mercy to Shadow for Shadow's sins. This deceitful angelic disguise adds a dichotomy which emphasizes his role as the devil. While not a one-to-one, maybe Doom is taking on this angelic form in a way similar to how the devil himself used to live in heaven as an angel. Of course, the game itself doesn't go straight into a bunch of Christian things, but it gives a player who, depending on what country you're from, probably knows the baseline stuff about Christianity, more of a visual connection to make for the character. I'd say kind of the same deal with Maria, who is overly perfect sometimes, shares the same name with the Virgin Maria, who in Christianity is not perfect, but not holding too many flaws. Anyways, Black Doom plans to recruit Shadow, or take over his body and soul if that doesn't work, to use in his army. However, since Shadow has already defeated Black Doom, proving to himself that he's greater than Black Doom, he has to work a little harder to get him. And I think that is why Doom is showing him problems that the Black Arm's powers can't prevent. Times when succumbing to the darkness served his goals, and maybe loved ones he could have saved. And there she is. Similar to Shadow, I've purposefully avoided the biggest elephant in the barely functioning psyche, Maria Robotnik. After the animations, I mentioned how Shadow Generations follows Shadow proceeding through the grieving process for his past, though mainly Maria's passing, because that's the important part. At the end of Shadow 05, while not said explicitly, I always got the impression that Shadow remembered either his entire or most of his past. When the Chaotix played that video, he both fully recognized Professor Gerald and stated that he made a promise to Maria. With the exception of one of the other non-canon endings, Shadow never mentioned that promise to Maria, nor did he ever have a clue what Gerald looked like. Which, to cover my bases with commenters, technically in Japanese he mentions Gerald's hopes and not Maria's wish, though I don't think that really changes the circumstance overall. He's regaining some kind of memory, and if you need a more on-screen moments of it happening, then I'd debate that you can interpret the animations and manga as him filling in some blanks he might have not done yet. Going off of that, the interesting thing Shadow Generations does is dig into the pain of salvaging his memories. Back in the first animation, he didn't just wake up from his memory. His world shattered around him. Shadow felt everything fall apart. Then in the third animation and a few early cutscenes of Shadow Generations, he started to recall Maria and what she meant to him, but actively chose to ignore it. Remembering not just her, but how she failed her hurts him inside. Gerald created Shadow as the ultimate life form. He's incapable of failure. Therefore, he needs to bottle that emotion up. It adds an extra layer to the ending of Shadow 05 when he said adios to Shadow the Hedgehog. He's not only saying goodbye to the Ark, Black Doom, and Maria because he's ready to move on and live by a new code he forges without anyone else's guidance, he moves on because he fears to look at the past. To Shadow, Maria represented more than just a wish and a code of ethics to follow. She was a family member, Shadow's only friend. And I think that's what the prologue works and the Sonic 3 movie wanted to emphasize. I saw many people get scared that Shadow might revert to living purely for Maria's wish due to some trailers, and man, did that reading really miss the point of the story. A reading that I think partially goes back to Sega's failure to make Maria a real character until now, but I went over that earlier. Shadow has moved past living by Maria, Gerald, or Black Doom's wish, but despite that, he still cares about Maria the person. And while he's tried to hide that, he has to confront this feeling when a time-displaced Maria and Gerald Robotnik show up in White Space after Sunset Heights. Shadow finds Maria running from a few Black Arms soldiers, and immediately, without a single extra thought, Shadow locks in with a literal spark in his eyes to save Maria, shocking her by his usage of both chaos control and his doom powers, which also clues us in that Maria and Gerald likely come from a time before the Gizoid attack, hence why they don't know that Shadow even knows combat at all. Of course, Shadow didn't plan for this at all. While Shadow spent the game so far trying to ignore Maria, now he can't. This meetup isn't just him confronting the past like with any of the boss fights or levels. He's confronting his long-dead family. Because of that, he ponders the possibility of saving them. An idea he has that, I'll be honest, gets a little hurt by the actual video game pacing matching Sonic Generations pacing. Gerald and Maria show up only after Sunset Heights, so they don't get many chances for cutscenes, and I think Shadow only brings up the idea of saving them one more time. However, Gerald and Maria do far more for Shadow Generations than just make up some extra motivation for Shadow. Yes, they do motivate him, and that is important near the end, but the audience knows he can't succeed in flat out saving them. They're still dead in Forces and Frontiers. Instead, they help to humanize Shadow, ground him in reality in a way that no other characters have in the series. Up until now, Shadow's never openly told someone he cares for them. Even during completely obvious times like when he saved Rouge in Adventure 2, he tried to keep his cool. He refused to show compassion for someone else out of fear of losing them like he lost Maria. But with the return of Gerald and Maria, he has no reason to put on airs. He can show his vulnerable side just as the two of them can. An aspect that the pre-release material got a little better since it didn't have to deal with an actual video game in between every cutscene. However, thanks to the whole video game thing getting in the way of the main story cutscenes, it leads to the white space dialogue and the readable entries of Gerald's journal to pick up a ton of the slack. While the manga and animation had to focus on exciting events worthy of paying people to make into a story for others to watch, the white space dialogue in Gerald's journal give us small snapshots into the lives of Shadow and the Robotniks on the Ark, with Maria especially enjoying to speak about the amusing parts of Ark life, such as the researchers who she claims got along with Shadow, as we saw in the manga, playing around with Abraham like in that one scene of Shadow 05 where he spanked himself, and bragging about her cool school report about the Chow, also pleading for Shadow to finish his school assignment he's ignored. Yeah, they're not afraid to talk about his flaws, but it's okay. She and Gerald also talk about Shadow's coolness, with Gerald praising himself for creating such a powerful life form with chaos control and limitless potential, while Maria notices newfound confidence as compared to their old life on the Ark and says how cool it is when his spines go swoosh in the wind. However, in addition to what Gerald knows, he adds in his own little theories that circle back to games that took place after his death, such as pondering if Shadow could keep stable if he removed the inhibitor rings like first used in Sonic X, and he has a new theory that if two people use chaos control together, they could open a ripple in space. Though of course, Gerald knows that no one can match Shadow's chaos control ability, so it can't happen. For the most intriguing bits of information hidden here, that connects to that of the Robotnik family tree. Gerald shares with Shadow that he had two sons, one who took up archaeology and one who entered the world of robotics, splitting Gerald's interests into two. Obviously, one son fathered Eggman, while the other fathered Maria, and for a new reveal, Maria's younger sister. A statement way too fucking wild to tuck away in a text-only line in a journal entry. With Frontiers introducing the idea of Eggman's resentment for his family, I can only assume they plan this to go somewhere. Maybe this random woman that's appeared in a few promo materials, but let's stay focused on the story here rather than what I think may come. When we look to Gerald's journal, this effectively solidifies a lot of the subtext and metatextual information that Sonic fans have known for a long time, while humanizing both the good and bad parts of Gerald better than the games had before. Even the presentation tells us a lot. It's not a simple entry 1 to end journal. We see many spots with pages torn out or names blacked out due to Gunn trying to hide information, Gerald ripping parts out after his madness, or maybe even Eggman hiding pages he found of special interest to his future plans. The artists who worked on this put their all into it. It's so worth reading, even if the cursive can be a little difficult sometimes. Anyways, Shadow Generations itself, and especially this journal, presents casual Sonic fans with much of what diehard fans have already analyzed for years. Like, I think fans forget this sometimes. No one actually mentions Maria's illness in-game, besides maybe Battle, which I'm not double checking. That script has a million fucking pages. Even the second page features Gerald recounting his own visit to Angel Island, validating the theory that many fans, including myself, believe through very valid in-game evidence that the Master Emerald and mural of Supersonic inspired Gerald's choice to study chaos, the emeralds, and give Shadow his hedgehog shape. But it doesn't just jump right to his research of those things after the Angel Island entry. Gerald simply made a visit to the island and left once he felt an an unsafe presence, perhaps implying Knuckles' predecessor kept a close watch on him. Not long after his short trip, the government sends him up to the Ark with his research crew and lots of money coming straight from
Redacted.
Pretty easy to assume that's Gun, because from here on, Gun becomes the villain of the journal. Gerald constantly laments his struggles to develop weapons for Gun just slightly to the side of his moral compass, while caring for and curing Maria, confirming that every discovery he made from Emerald, the Chaos Drives, and Artificial Chaos all eventually went to Gun so he could spend more time saving Maria through Project Shadow. Starting with his attempts to make the Bio-Lizard, which it still keeps a little mysterious. You still need to read a little between the pages around it, and if we do, we can figure out that Gerald still chased after the God of Destruction Chaos to make Shadow, resulting in the Bio-Lizard with his zooted out Chaos energy. The journal starts to focus in on Gerald's failure, fear of Gun, anger with his own inadequacy, and a weird Rivals 2 reference where he went mad for a page, then takes a sudden left turn once he chooses to work with Black Doom. Now that we've seen his failures from his perspective, we have a better glimpse into why he chose to make such an awful choice. However, it's a choice he doesn't seem to regret immediately, because Shadow's appearance gives Gerald and Maria their happiest moments in the whole journal. Shadow guides them to their new light, happy life, and as such, Maria names him Shadow, because a shadow points you toward the light. A very good implementation of a line in an obscure Sonic Channel comic by Eitaro Toyoda. Then the rest of the journal, while very well written, goes through a few events we already know, such as Maria's sister, the Black Arms, and even how Gerald named the Eclipse Cannon to reference Shadow, since an eclipse makes a shadow, which I think is pretty cool. It's real happy. Oh yeah, that part. Interestingly, it seems they added a new lore element that not only did Gun fear Shadow and the Black Arms, but the final straw instigating their shutdown of the Ark stemmed from the Gizoid's rampage. Gun caused the Gizoid to attack due to feeding it too many weapons, and they needed to shut up anyone who could know about it, turning Gun into an even bigger villain and explaining Gerald's distrust of them further. I think more than any other Sonic media, this journal has done the best job at humanizing Gerald by putting us directly into his situation. The US Army analog forced him to create man-made horrors beyond his comprehension, and after they messed up, threw him under the bus. It turns Gerald into a more sympathetic psychopath like Vulcan from X-Men or Sephiroth from FF7. Villains who we can't just side with and let run amok, but we understand how circumstance led them to their destination. While before, similar to Maria, the writers just told us to believe stuff. Which is why if you think Gerald and Maria didn't do enough in the actual game, you need to read this journal, watch the animations, and at least read the first 2 manga chapters. All of this together fixes them into one of the most interesting parts of the story, which I guess we should loop back to. We should take a look at the bosses, because Shadow Generations takes a very interesting approach. Back in Sonic Generations, they really just picked the most iconic bosses Sonic fought from each era. So all of our favorites like Perfect Chaos, Shadow, Metal Sonic. Well, for Shadow Generations, they picked the Bio-Lizard, Metal Overlord, Mephiles, and of course, Black Doom. Which personally, I really wanted an infinite boss fight, since Shadow, literally not knowing infinite, could play into his inferiority complex, but that overlaps with what they do with the Mephiles fight, since Shadow doesn't know him either, and I understand why they skipped him after thinking on the theming more. All 4 of the bosses we fight share some kind of data with Shadow. Black Doom's blood helped to make him, Gerald made Shadow after the Bio-Lizard, so they shared some of his research, Metal Overlord copied ultimate lifeform data, and Mephiles took on a form resembling Shadow through his shadow. The 3 fights before Doom represent quite a few things. First, Doom shows Shadow what he could accomplish if he took up Doom's offer to join him. The Bio-Lizard's overwhelming power over Chaos energy, mastery of Chaos control such as seen by Metal Overlord, command of entire armies like Mephiles, pretty cool powers that Doom can offer him. It makes sense why Black Doom, who cares about controlling power, sees these 3 as desirable. Well, for Shadow, he doesn't simply reject their power by stating something mushy like, "My heart and friends give me my strength." No. He beats the fucking shit out of all of them. Shadow doesn't need their power because he has surpassed them. Remember the Titan battles in Sonic Frontiers? The boss fights that mechanically had some issues, but people mostly forgave it because of how much flair they stuffed into every frame? Okay, well, Shadow Generations has a similar amount of flair with better mechanics. All of them implement Shadow's special abilities in-game like Chaos control and the Doom powers in interesting ways that the action stages couldn't do. For example, during the Bio-Lizard, the presentation makes you think you need to wait a while for the Bio-Lizard to do the stop and breathy thing platform bosses tend to do, but if you Chaos Control it during the moment he stabs his tentacles into the floor, you earn an early kick on him, which sets you up to think Chaos Control helps a lot for these fights, until Metal Overlord knocks you back down. Because as you may recall from Sonic Heroes, Metal can also perform Chaos Control, so the only time it helps against him occurs at one of the green paths, meaning now Shadow has to beat Metal Overlord without his cool time-related tricks. Mephiles then keeps up the escalation of ability use by wrapping most of his fight around the Squid power-up and Ronaldinho bullshit, where if you wait to kick his ass a little before knocking him up into these balls, you can end the fight significantly earlier. Speaking of how they end, each one has the rawest looking QTE sequence. Shadow knocks an entire ball of chaos energy back to the Bio-Lizard, stops a giant fucking battleship Metal throws at him, and holy shit, the Mephiles part. It starts with you, the player, actively needing to homing attack Mephiles and his clones under Chaos Control until it switches to a QTE where he readies a bunch of Chaos Spheres to hit each one like Dio from JoJo. For as cool as that is, believe it or not, the mechanics and flair doesn't even impress me the most, because underneath the surface, these four bosses have a full spectrum of how Shadow feels towards his enemies. With the Bio-Lizard, he doesn't truly hate him. In fact, he feels bad for him more than anything, calling the Bio-Lizard a tortured soul he wants to put out of his misery. Then with Metal, we find a villain that Shadow feels some connection with as a Robotnik made both, and the two have some deep-rooted trauma, even if he doesn't necessarily like him. While for Mephiles, here they got it perfect. I've heard and seen a few comments where people say they want Mephiles to come back in a really important role. Not sure how this idea started, but I've seen multiple people say it, that Mephiles could act kind of like Xehanort for Sonic, which I mega disagree with. To me, he's about as important as the other gods of destruction at the time, only the others like Doom, Chaos, and even Dark Gaia to a lesser extent actually have close connections to the Chaos Emeralds that play important roles in a majority of the games, while Mephiles' backstory connects so deeply to Soliana that I don't feel you could give him an important role in another story even if they wanted to. Because remember, he no longer exists, which Shadow Generations picks up on. Mephiles, during this fight, shows his pathetic side. He knows he doesn't exist and wants to come back into the timeline. Because of that, he hates Shadow even more than he did before, while Shadow doesn't know him at all. Mephiles' pleas go as well as a bum on the sidewalk. Truly, if they had to put this character in a game again, this is the way to do it. I fucking love what they did with all four of these bosses. Shadow goes from a monster he feels pity for, an enemy he related to on an emotional level, some bum he cares nothing for, and then finally, a monster he actively hates with Black Doom. It's a genius use of his villains. Though I'm still a little bit bummed about Infinite. Maybe he can come back later, because unlike Chaos, Bio-Lizard, or Mephiles, who all had definitive closure of some kind in their games, Infinite fucks off into the Phantom Ruby, which normally warps people into other points of time and space. So I still have a little hopium that Infinite could return sometime later. After all, Black Doom returned, and no one expected that. Anyways, once Shadow completes Chaos Island Act 2, he finds himself warped back to an area he's familiar with, though not one he expected to arrive at. Back to his left, he sees Central City with the text City Escape right above it, indicating to the player that Shadow has found Sonic's white space. And within the same second a common player figures it out, Sonic appears for possibly the best animated talking head cutscene in Sonic history. Shadow Generations has stepped up the cutscene animation by a country mile compared to Frontier's occasional sock puppet theater with real camera angles and body expressions, while this cutscene in particular takes the cake for me. People bitch about the models in this series so often, which, you know, can look kinda stiff. Yet here we go, seeing Sonic's spine swooshing in the wind while giving Shadow fuck me eyes the way we all wanted in a game called Sonic X Shadow Generations. It even switches the camera between Sonic and Shadow's focus to put the player back into his perspective, which probably about 50% of the players experienced the day before because they binged it to get to Shadow's part. It makes this into just one really cool cutscene where the two games you just played cross together. I did feel a tiny ounce of disappointment when the Sonic vs. Shadow fight didn't give a real fight, just the well-animated cutscene, though it's another instance where a little thought made me forgive them, since I had just fought the exact same fight a day ago in Sonic Generations. However, the cool addition comes from the end. As we all know, Shadow needs one Chaos Emerald to properly perform Chaos Control, a major mechanic in our current video game. So, once unproportionally lanky Sonic knocks the yellow emerald out of Shadow, he immediately makes his his way back to adventuring with cooler-shaped Sonic, which leads to Shadow revealing to Rouge, who joins up with Shadow here since Sonic saved her by this point in his story, that Sonic took the fake emerald Tails created in SA2. An absolutely insane twist they could only pull off because Shadow happened to have the yellow emerald in the original generations, which seems to have now become Shadow's de facto emerald if we follow the upcoming IDW cover implication. I'm hoping it has something to do with the issue 75 cliffhanger, but that's not for here. Once Rouge fills him in about Sonic Squared's journey, they devise a plan for Rouge to quickly swap the emeralds before the final fight so that you, the player, as Shadow, can continue using Chaos Control. Though not for too long, because only a little later Black Dooms come back to tell Shadow and Gerald that due to their link in time and white space, he's grown in power. Just like Shadow though, who, after slaying the beast of his past / parallel past / a fucking villain Sonic fought, has realized how strong of a warrior he's become, allowing his hate for Doom and fear of losing Maria and Gerald to overcome him. Until Maria says a little speech to stop him. A speech which, within Shadow Generations by itself, does feel a tad hammy. She repeats the Shadow pointing towards the light spiel, which I feel worked better as a slightly hidden piece of information. It makes Maria a tad too perfect sounding in this scene, which does match her past portrayal, but after the animations, manga, and especially Sonic 3 movie, yeah, I'm recording this part way later, I grew to like her more grounded portrayal, where Shadow's memories of the past perfected her flaws. Either way, she and Gerald motivate Shadow to defeat Black Doom. Which, running through that part, he travels back to Radical Highway, which I already talked about, confronts Double Doom in a tough-as-hell gauntlet of a boss fight with a new version of All Hail Shadow. We see a cool QTE scene that I think they fucked up the aspect ratio on, and Shadow saves the day with Black Doom's destruction. Yeah, sorry, the final little part is your standard adventure-era Sonic finale with a big god that you gotta destroy, though not much to say there. I guess Shadow has the wings instead of Supersonic if that's something you want me to note. What comes after this scene interests me a lot more. Upon Doom's defeat, Rouge tells Shadow that she needs to swap for the real Chaos Emerald right now to stop the Time Eater, while Shadow goes back to Maria and Gerald for a final goodbye, which gives us where I think the ending sticks the landing. With Doom's defeat and the W Sonic straightening the timeline, Gerald and Maria start dusting back to where they came from, presenting us with a scene that I think gives us a better idea of how Shadow's actually felt since regaining his memory, because while the two of them motivated Shadow, they never said what he had to do. Gerald and Maria made requests of Shadow to fight Doom and protect humanity, while Shadow chose to follow through that for himself. Comparing it back to Shadow 05, he chose to fight Doom then for the Doctor, while now he fought him for his own personal vendetta. Similar to what Frontiers did, it uses parts of the past to motivate the future, thus making today's journey feel more like Shadow's journey for his own future. It's a stark contrast to Shadow 05, which for all amnesiac intents and purposes, starred a Shadow unlike the one from his past. Here, thanks to Shadow properly realizing his power, staying on his own path, and making amends with Gerald and Maria, Shadow can, for the first time in his life, find a complete form of closure. Not an escape through death in SA2, or an escape through disassociation like in Shadow 05. Shadow finally grieves about his loss as he runs with his new friend. I really fucking love the ending of Shadow Generations. I know, the story doesn't do it for everyone. I've seen quite a few well-written critiques, but for me, I think this alone has made Shadow completely overcome the edgy stigma people have placed on him. Or maybe, more accurately, it overcomes that while accepting it. Like, with the wild QTEs against the bosses, Black Doom Power's insanely well-directed cutscenes despite most of them taking place in a blank white void, I think Sonic Team has finally given us their most confident Sonic game in years. So many titles in this series, ever since motherfucking a 3D Blast with the pre-rendered sprites like Donkey Kong, has had the issue of following the new popular ideas, as if past titles felt embarrassed of that Sonic logo. Well, to me, Sonic Team has slowly gotten over that embarrassment with the back-to-backs of Frontiers, Superstars, Murder, and Shadow Generations. Just like Frontiers, Shadow Generations makes me excited for the future. Only unlike Frontiers, which had me about 50% excited for the future and 50% happy with the present, Sonic X Shadow Shadow Generations as a whole package had me happy with what I had. This exact package that Sega currently sells, undoubtedly in my mind, takes the title for best Sonic purchase you can make. Sonic has not had this clear of a success track record since the early 90s. The best way I can put Shadow Generations, if we're gonna compare it to Dragon Ball like everyone always does, Shadow Generations is the Dragon Ball Super superhero of Sonic games. Yeah, some of the plot points are rehashes of what we've seen before, the villain is returning from before, but we're following a fan favorite character who's gotten mega shafted with really high quality animation and writing that is surpassing what we've seen for the past while. If you're a Sonic fan, I don't get how you could hate this one. My only hope now is that our next Sonic game puts together all the goods of both Frontiers, Shadow Generations, and removes all of the stuff people hated. Just maybe, and I might be reaching here, we can finally get a mainline game where you play as both Sonic and Shadow in their own journeys with stories in brand new locations. If they do that, which on paper doesn't sound like that wild of a hope, we may get the best Sonic game ever.